Hey, welcome to the Key Code 4K workflow panel. Today we're streaming live from Ray's Boathouse, just north of downtown Seattle, and the view here is amazing. Well, the view out there, the view here, it's all right, but the view out there is amazing. Now you'd expect a 4K workflow panel to be streamed in 4K, but this face, not 4K compatible, so we've dumbed it down a little bit. But today we're going to touch on three aspects of high-res production workflows. We're going to talk about acquisition, storage, and distribution. And our crack staff at Key Code Media has put together a bunch of questions for me to ask our expert panelists here, and I'm going to introduce them right now. Immediately to my right, we've got Bryce Button, AJA Product Marketing Manager. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Next, we have Matt Stamos, Solution Architect from Quantum.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Matt. And Eli Blackman, last but not least, Senior Field Marketing Manager at Elemental Technologies.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome, gentlemen. Now, before we get started, we want to let the audience know that this webcast is meant to be interactive. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can tweet us at hashtag 4KCrazy. We'll be taking questions at the end of the stream, see what we can answer, see what you guys come up with to stump us or intrigue us. And other than that, let's get going. First questions are going to be for you, Bryce. First of all, welcome.
Thank you very much.
We're all big fans of AJA. We love what you do. I'd like to talk about the beginning of the 4K process, which is capture. And the first question that comes up is, what are the major challenges for 4K signal distribution?
Well, at AJA, of course, we do make the Scion camera for full-on 4K capture, including Ultra HD. Then we work through the entire pipeline chain. So we provide converters, because you, of course, have to take 4K signals, and for a lot of people, they're still working with HD equipment. They need to utilize that. Everything from fiber to up-down cross conversion. We also move into streaming through our editing products and, of course, the editing process. Mm-hmm. And in fact, at IBC, we even announced our first HEVC card, which are going into OEM applications, so we can start getting the stuff to the home, because that's one of the biggest hurdles at the moment.
And when do you think that'll be released to the general public?
Well, that type of stuff will be used in products almost immediately with various partners, because it needs to get into the broadcasting head end, so it can get from there to the home. Outstanding.
So, first generation 4K signal flow. When it was first done, it was achieved through quad 3G HD SDI. That is a mouthful. For those who aren't familiar with it, can you explain how it works, and when will that quad 3G technology become redundant with the introduction of 12G?
Well, 12G has actually been out there for some time with some of our competitors. The reality is that the 3G standard is still very much the standard. And it's called quad because you're using 4 of these cables, and it's also a nice multiplier when it comes from the HD base. 12G is something we've obviously looked at. It hasn't taken off in a huge way within the industry, largely because the real end goal is probably going to be 20G in terms of dealing with the needs of 8K and HDR workflows and color depth and all that kind of thing. So for the moment, I think 4 times 3G SDI cables for professionals is still the way to go. It integrates with the workflows and the environments that are already in place. And it's something that you can route quite simply and that type of thing. Probably going to be more of a move to IP type broadcasting that'll occur quicker than a full-on 12G implementation.
Oddly, you'd mentioned that. You must have seen these questions. Now that's my next question.
Mm-hmm.
Latest buzz for live production is the move to IP-based signal distribution, moving away from SDI. How do you see that playing out in 4K? You just touched on it briefly. But
yeah, it's already occurring, of course. There are, at IBC 2015 in Amsterdam, NewTek made their big announcement in terms of their new standard NDI. That's an open protocol. And because of that, all our current cards, for instance, the Kona cards, IO 4Ks, which handle 4K, will be able to be utilized, and there's no extra payment or anything like that for our users. So that'll go into the stream. The big gap between using IP for full-on broadcast versus what's largely occurring at the moment, which is over the top, is there's a big difference between having sports, for instance, which needs to arrive at home at the moment it's going on, and what effectively happens with most IP systems at this moment in time, where there's a bit of a delay, so the OTT stuff makes more sense for that, where it's not as critical. So we're living in an in-between stage at the moment. The industry is looking at it obviously very seriously. The big issue there is that most of the systems are proprietary. So Sony has their IP standard, a number of other manufacturers have theirs. We certainly look at this as a company that builds bridge products as probably a good environment for us to get involved in, since we've always been very good at that kind of thing, getting from point A to point B.
Do you see it as possibly a personnel matter too? You've got a lot of young folks coming up in the industry that that are used to the current technology, and if you go around a lot of the call letter stations, stuff like that, you got a lot of grizzly old veterans that are used to plugging that cable in and going. Do you see it more as just the younger crowd coming in, be able to adopt quicker and move up, resistance from the top going down, or is this just going to kind of roll forward and progress?
I think it'll be a natural evolution. You know, basically what you're getting at there is that there's a difference between the IT crowd and the traditional broadcast crowd. Both of them coexist at this point in time, and that kind
barely,
of
but there's what they do.
It's happening very quickly. And so, you know, even on that basis, in the last year alone, we've introduced HD-based T products for conversion, which can handle HD and, you know, eventually elements of 4K. And that's just using standard Ethernet cables going point to point. So there's no doubt it's on. It's a more affordable architecture in general. And I think we'll see a lot of that evolution in the next couple of years.
We got nods of agreement from the rest of the group. What trends are you seeing with 4K recording options, codecs, outboard devices, et cetera, et cetera?
There are quite a few ways to go. You know, 4K has obviously been with us for quite some time, and that's largely on the purely acquisition front, the camera. There's always been a big gap, though, between what camera manufacturers put out there and what the rest of us can deal with. So, for instance, a lot of camera manufacturers have never made editing systems, so it really wasn't their headache what happened post-camera. That being the reality, obviously pure uncompressed 4K is a massive amount of data to handle. And in practice, we've seen raw workflows, we've seen various compression standards. We've chosen to go largely with ProRes, because you're looking at HD type bandwidth for 4K production. And the ProRes codecs, all the way Arri's using them, of course, in their cameras, they're visually indistinguishable from the original anyway. And so the sign, for instance, has got ProRes 4444, and you won't be able to tell the difference between that and an AJ raw file that's been worked on in post. So those compression standards are reality, and on the far end of the other chain, when it comes to what Elemental's doing, etc., obviously that type of thing kicks in on the compression side for home delivery, and that's taken a bit of time to arrive at, but it's here now, and that's HEVC and H.265
I was walking through Best Buy yesterday, and Samsung has this gorgeous curved screen, 4K monitor for under $2,000. I was looking at that and thinking, wow, that'd be nice, but what am I truly going to watch in 4K? And we'll touch on that towards the end. But you're right, it's here, and it's going to become more prevalent. Question: resolution or frame rate? Which is most important? Now, Nintendo, for example, they go for high frame rate.
Yes.
Xbox and PlayStation, it's all about resolution. So, are either one of them right? Where do you stand?
They're all right depending upon what you're trying to achieve.
Okay.
So from the broadcast point of view, which is where a lot of our business obviously clearly sits, it's about frame rate. So in terms of the testing that the networks have done, they've got to look at it from the practical business model, which is where are we going to implement 4K and where's the money at? Well, the reality for quite some time has been iTunes is out there, Netflix is out there, Amazon stuff is out there, and that works fine for episodic shows and that type of thing. But if you're doing broadcast, your real money's in sports and news. And so you look at that, and in testing, they've already realized that from the audience point of view, frame rate rules. So it doesn't matter how great the resolution is if it looks like it's stuttering or you can't kick in for a replay and it's nice and smooth. So the practical end result is almost all the implementations going on right now, and they've started in the UK with Premier League. You're going to start seeing it next year with the Olympics, etc. It'll definitely be 60p. So 50 and 60p is the reality there. And it's a simple thing of audience testing. You can look at the resolution, but if it looks stuttery, people are not happy.
Sure.
And so that seems to be where it's landing up, whereas for episodic, it could be as low as 24 frames per second if you wanted to.
Get that grainy movie look to
yes.
it, yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the strategy and techniques for up conversion to 4K? We're going to have a lot of 4K productions that are going to want to mix in HD assets with their 4K. So can you touch on up conversion for us?
Yeah, that's a very real problem. It was one of our biggest announcements at IBC is our new frame synchronizer and 4K up converter. Because again, I can go to a network, if I'm working for the network, and say, hey, we should be broadcasting this sport in 4K. And they'll go, great. What are we going to do about
all of our highlights that are in
our highlights
HD,
in HD, the fact that the advertising is certainly still arriving in HD, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why we introduced the FS3. So we've had a lot of experience already in scaling, and the FS3, for instance, features adaptive scaling, which is absolutely stunning from HD to 4K. And those kind of tools are going to have to be there to move any serious entity into the 4K universe for perpetual 4K broadcast.
The next question is, what were the first uses of 4K you've seen in broadcasting? You kind of touched on that. It looks like it's going to be sports and news are really going to be the big push coming across the pond here to the States, and we'll see 4K in news and sports. And then where do you see it catching up from there? Who's next to bat after that? Is it?
Well, I think it's, it obviously started with cinema, period. Digital cinema has been something that most of us have lived with for reality almost a decade now. Red camera's been around forever, and they've had 5K, etc. So the cinema was a natural place to begin. With broadcast, that's happening now and again in sports. In terms of other elements, live events are huge. We do a lot of stuff where our equipment is used for live concerts. Katy Perry has got a wall of video she's got to dance in front of. That type of thing has certainly pushed 4K along. So it's really across the board. But live events have been a big drive. It's almost an AV type market, but it's very real and there's big money in it. So those are elements. I don't know what.
I mean, do you really want to see the Rolling Stones in 4K though? I mean, is that really the best use for that technology? Because
possibly not, but I'm not going to get into subjectivity there. You might want to see what's behind them in 4K though if you're sitting in a huge stadium.
If there's anybody dancing on the sides, we're good to go.
Yeah.
Moving to editorial, even Avid Media Composer now supports 4K natively. How are users achieving 4K ingest and 4K monitoring?
So it depends how you go about it, but for typical editing scenarios, obviously we're one of the major manufacturers of I/O products, and on that end we have desktop PCIe cards, like the Kona 4, and then we have Thunderbolt. So Thunderbolt was a big deal there. Thunderbolt 2 allowed us to create the I/O 4K, which can be utilized, of course, with a little Mac urn, or it can be utilized with the trash can, or it can be utilized with your MacBook. So that reality has been with us for a while, and I produce a lot of the videos for our company. We've been doing 4K production on that end with those I/O devices for 3 years or so.
So an easy conversion then?
Yeah, it's fairly straightforward. And in fact, on the iMac, for instance, and even some of the HP machines, you can do basic 4K display out just off the display port or Thunderbolt port. The reason to still have I/O devices is all about sync and locked frame rate. So some people don't necessarily understand if you just plug in a display from your computer, are you actually seeing true frame rate? And that's why an I/O device to this day is still essential, because it's got to be locked to those actual frame timings.
Understood. To finish up, and we'll move on, but of course, this is a panel discussion, so I'm hoping you guys will all discuss. Can you speak a little about HDR and 10-bit for me? You mentioned it before we started off camera that it was of interest, and I want to ask you to throw it out and tell us about HDR and 10-bit.
Well, yeah, it's an intriguing move. When I worked at Autodesk, we always were dealing with HDR for cinema, OpenEXR standards, all sorts of things. Now it's becoming a bigger element. Adobe showed, for instance, Premiere with HDR workflows with one of our I/O 4Ks at IBC, etc. And what that really is about is seeing more color depth. So in scenarios where that is more important than frame rate, for instance, and also for smaller sets, because one of the big catches with 4K for the home environment is you're kind of wasting your time buying anything under 55 inches.
You're not going to see it. You're not going to see what's being produced.
You're not really going to see it. So HDR is about getting much richer color depth in there, etc. And it was intriguing to me that with the latest OS moves, Windows 10 has got 10-bit support. The truth is, on the Mac OS, for instance, it's only with this latest version of El Capitan that you're getting 10-bit on an iMac. So those 4K and 5K iMacs were actually showing you more than 8-bit color before. So even for the production side, we're just slowly getting there. So I think that all comes around to the fact that I think people will make choices based upon their project needs, where stuff's going to be shown. But what's very exciting for all of us, and all of us sitting here, is we basically make tools that now make a real 4K workflow from beginning to end possible. And that's really been the catch until this year and going into 2016. It was really hard to have a smooth pipeline.
End to end, yeah.
And at this point, we're pretty much there.
Outstanding. Thank you. Appreciate it.